Let's talk about writing for legacy brands. You may be the kind of writer who is really into writing for startups and entrepreneurs and small businesses and new businesses, but there's a whole world of business out there that's the opposite of that. Legacy businesses have been around for a decade, more than decades. They're businesses that are well established, that are the titans in their industry, that are the behemoths, that are the big guys, the big players. And writing for them requires certain narrative skills. So I want to unpack what those skills are. To set context, this is one of a series of videos that I've done around brand voice types. At Hire a Writer, my copywriting agency, we've identified 6 brand voice types. We ran an analysis of the top 500 brands in the world and did like a big psycholinguistic evaluation of how those brands self-describe and the kinds of messaging and communication that they use. And we basically landed on these 6 types. And the type that we're going to talk about when we talk about legacy brands, we have added a caricature to kind of help you understand. We really value iconography and visualization because we think it helps writers understand what they're going for. So when we talk about legacy brands and what we're going to talk about today, we're talking about a caricature that we call Theo. So Theo is a gentleman of distinction. And that is a very powerful framework or idea or character to consider when you begin writing for established legacy brands. The kinds of brands who communicate like Theo are Harvard Business Review, Goldman Sachs. IBM has taken quite an evolution, so you should Google IBM. Their brand evolution has been fascinating. Rolex, American Airlines, American Express. There are a lot of research firms, giant financial institutions. Again, these are the big players. These are not novel and scrappy. These are, and we describe them this way, refined, delightful, professional, wise. As you begin to craft messaging for a brand like this, it's important that you balance the serious-mindedness with levity and conversationalism and relevance, okay? So immediately, you heard the name, you saw our caricature that we drew, and you thought, okay, so this brand is boomer white guys. Historically, let's be candid, that has been a predominant segment of the leaders of organizations like this. Okay, just that is what it is. It is very, very important. And you'll see as I continue through this mini lesson kind of how we have kind of forced the perspective to expand because the industry thankfully is evolving, right, to have more diverse perspectives and to feature more paradigms. However, it is not wrong to think that many of your references and many of the kind of things that you allude to, many of the metaphors you employ will have an element of serious-mindedness, of learning, of tradition, of the kind of historical precedents that have been set. Legacy is in itself this idea of succession, right, of having an impact, of making a difference. But it is important as a writer that you kind of look at this and consider the people who have driven brands like this and who have been leading brands like this, and naturally leadership is going to impact communication, so how these brands have been described in the marketplace, have not been boring old white guys. They are the people who originally innovated some of the most important ideas in our culture. Okay, that air travel could be different, that credit cards could be different, that the news could be different. So I think that it's important that you balance what you see when you research brands like this with the reality of them being disruptive in the time that they were, and their disruption has since, built something that's very, very well established. But the balance of perspective and then voice is very important. And as a writer, it's your job to strike that balance really well. So with all of these brand voices, we do a literary reference, in part because we like to read and we like books, and in part because references are really helpful. All art is imitation. So as you write, you need to be finding and pulling the right series of references so that you can depict this voice adequately. So in literature, we actually use Albus Dumbledore. And I realize it's interesting to use somebody who's kind of so wacky for a brand like this. But if you think about it, he is this incredibly powerful figurehead in the world of Harry Potter, which we are huge Harry Potter fans. And the quote that we bring in for him that kind of helps give you an understanding of why we're using him as an archetype here is that words are, in my not so humble opinion, our most inexhaustible source of magic, capable of both inflicting injury and remedying it. So the power of language for brands like this is exceptionally important. They are the brands that will agonize, that will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on advertising campaigns to get the lingo just right. So there is a level of precision that you have to exercise when you're writing for brands like this that I think is really important for writers to understand. It's not necessarily the same as if you're just kind of writing for a startup or something that is smaller and less established. There's quite a lot at stake when brands like this communicate. It's almost like a politician communicating. The words have to be very carefully crafted and chosen to appeal to a very wide audience. So these are just some more images that kind of help you understand the vibe that you're going for. And then here are some cultural references. We think these are really important because these are real, live, living, breathing people, right, who kind of embody, in our opinion, Theo and the brands that Theo would represent. Two observations quickly. First is that the diversity needs to stretch, right? So we're kind of evolving this brand as we begin to write for new audiences and things, which is imperative, obviously, from a moral perspective and, because it will work. And then there is a weight of masculinity to a lot of the language. Okay, so language can be very masculine and feminine, including references and phraseology and all that. There is a weight of masculinity usually in brands like this, but depending on the brand, there may be an attempt either being actively made or have already been executed to make it a little bit more balanced in that regard. That's going to vary context to context. But the cultural references we would say that you should observe, watch their body language, their phrasing, their carriage, their dress, all those things, would be people like Barack Obama, Tom Hanks, Morgan Freeman, and Oprah Winfrey. So there's a gravitas. There's a top of the field, the creme de la creme, the highest performers in an arena kind of feeling as you consider how you approach and then convey Theo and brands that want to come off this way. One of the most important things you can do as a writer, embodying a brand voice, is to consider, what do I want somebody to feel like when they read this? And for Theo, what you want them to feel like is that they're at lunch with a trusted mentor. Theo is actively leaving a legacy, which relates to all kinds of important concepts, including impact and influence and virtue and the transference of ideas and passing the baton, which I think I already said, the succession idea of legacy. All of these things are very important, which is part of why the serious mindedness is still there and has great weight and value, even if you do use levity or employ some things to kind of lighten it up and make it more palatable in a marketing context. A few more images. So somebody who's instructing, somebody who is, conveying their big and important and time-tested ideas to new audiences. So let's look at some of the language that brands like this actually use. The first is Harvard Business Review. So I'm gonna kind of comment on it as I read it because I think this one is just jam-packed with value for this. Providing professionals around the world, so we have a global component, with rigorous insights, high standards, and best practices, so that's a superlative, to help lead themselves, so there's accountability, and their organizations, so there's impact and reach, more effectively, so outcomes driven, to make a positive impact. So there's that virtue element where there's good at the heart of this. That one's great. That's a really good example of all those different key ideas. Goldman Sachs, we think who you are, identity, makes you better at what you do, results or achievement. IBM, think. So like I already said, you can Google it. Like the evolution of IBM's brand is a whole case study in itself, but that's an interesting one. To the point, brevity, right? Rolex, a crown for every achievement. So there's upper echelon, highbrow, and then also that, again, achievement motif. American Airlines, we fly so you can soar. So there's a superlative component there, right? It's extreme, it's to great heights, using that metaphor. And then American Express, don't leave home without it. So many legacy brands will have products that are kind of fundamental or foundational. We have a different brand voice called Mia that is for everyday brands. So these are the things that are fairly disposable but essential kind of, that's a very different vibe than something like this that you would say is like people have built their small businesses because they have an American Express card. There's a huge kind of, again, serious-minded achievement, high goals, high performance, high outcomes, all of that, because this is a big deal. Okay. So I realized I like jam-packed a lot of concepts into there, but as a writer, I think that is the framework. So if you want to think about writing for a brand that is well established, that has an incredible reputation, that has a giant footprint, even globally, these are some of the ideas that you need to begin interacting with. And these are some of the words you need to begin playing around with and the concepts you need to begin implementing and working on so that you can become great at it. You may find as you get into this exercise that this is a brand voice that just like comes very naturally to you and you like it and you enjoy writing like this, or you may say, that's quite a leap for me. I'm interested in something else, in which case I urge you go look at some of the other brand voices and consider there may be one that just triggers flow for you, creative flow, and you're able to like get in the groove and you're like, this feels very natural and organic. So, you know, there will be one probably that you find, you know, a great deal of comfort with, but I always recommend as a writer, step outside of your comfort zone and try some new things, right? That's how you're going to grow and get better at what you do. Speaking of getting better at what you do, subscribe to my channel. I have all kinds of writer trainings. Go to our Hire a Writer blog, so hireawriter.us/blog, yeah. And all of our writers, many of our copywriters contribute to that blog, so you can see even their own voices and the ways that they approach the work, and there are a lot of great blogs that kind of tell you how to craft copywriting and give you great ideas for that. But I do wish you were the best. Copywriting is one of the best careers in the world. We love it with all our hearts, and branching out and becoming better at different versions of copywriting can give you an immense advantage in the marketplace, but it can also just be hugely fulfilling to you as a professional writer.